Once upon a time, in a bright and busy village, lived a couple named Fatima and Laolu. They had a little home, not big and fancy, but full of love. Fatima was very pretty, with a kind smile that lit up the room, and Laolu was strong and handsome. They were very happy because they had four beautiful daughters. Each one was like a sparkly gem, bright and beautiful. But Fatima and Laolu were very poor. Every day, Laolu worked very hard. He went to other people's farms and did a lot of work just to make sure they had enough food to eat. It wasn't always a lot, but they were thankful for whatever they had. Fatima, too, helped a lot. She fetched water, washed clothes for other people, and carried loads in the market, all to add a little more for their family. But even with all their hard work, things were tough. The little girls were growing and they needed things like books and pencils for school. But Fatima and Laolu often found it hard to pay for these. Sometimes the girls would come home early from school because they couldn't pay the fees. It made Fatima and Laolu sad, but they hugged their daughters, played with them, and tried to make each day as happy as they could. Their home was always filled with laughter and the sound of little feet running around. Even though they didn't have much, Fatima and Laolu loved each other and their daughters so much. They believed that somehow things would get better. They just didn't know how yet. So, every night under the twinkling stars, Fatima and Laolu would sit outside their small house, hold hands, and dream of a better tomorrow for their sweet girls. They knew it wasn't easy, but they had hope, and that was something very special to have. One sunny morning, Laolu felt very heavy in his heart. He knew he needed to find a way to make things better for his family. So, he decided to visit his friend in the next village, hoping for some help. He walked a long way under the big blue sky, thinking about his little girls and Fatima. When Laolu reached his friend's house, he was welcomed with a warm smile. Laolu told his friend about the tough times they were having. He asked, "Can you help me with some money?" His friend listened carefully and then said, "Laolu, I won't just give you fish. I'll show you how to catch them so you won't be hungry again." Laolu didn't understand at first, but he nodded, hoping for some good news. His friend took him to see an old man called the herbalist who lived deep in the forest. The herbalist's house was odd, covered in strange marks and surrounded by weird plants. Laolu felt a shiver as he stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and something else Laolu couldn't quite name. The herbalist listened to Laolu's story, his eyes twinkling in a strange way. Then he said, "I can help you become very rich, but it comes with a price." Laolu was eager to know more. "What do I need to do?" he asked. The herbalist looked at him seriously and said, "You must use your children in the ritual. They won't die, but they will suffer." Laolu was shocked and horrified. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I can't do that," he said. "I want the money to make my children's lives better, not to harm them. I'd rather leave than to do this to my own daughters." But then the herbalist said something scary. "Now that your eyes have seen and your ears have heard, if you walk away, you won't make it home." Scared and desperate, Laolu felt trapped. He thought about their little house, the unpaid school fees, and the empty pots at dinner time. With a heavy heart, Laolu agreed to the herbalist's dark deal, hoping somehow it wouldn't be as bad as it sounded. The herbalist gave him a black powder and instructed him to mix it into his children's food. He left the herbalist's house with a small black pouch and a promise that things would change. But as he walked home, the weight of what he had agreed to felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. After Laolu came back from the herbalist's dark and spooky hut, he was quiet and sad. He did what the herbalist told him to do, putting a little bit of the black stuff into his daughter's food. He hoped with all his heart that it wouldn't hurt them, that somehow everything would be okay. But the next day, something strange and sad happened. A strong wind blew through the village like it was angry about something. It wasn't just any wind. It whistled and howled, rattling doors and shaking trees. Everyone in the village talked about this strange wind. But for Laolu's family, it brought something worse. His eldest daughter, the one with the brightest smile, lost her sight. She couldn't see anything anymore. She cried, saying everything was dark. Laolu's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. He wanted to believe it was just the wind, that it was a strange accident. But inside, he knew it was because of the black stuff. The village whispered about the wind and the sudden blindness of Laolu's daughter. Then, on a day that seemed just a little too quiet, a mysterious man came to the village. He wore all black, from his hat to his boots, and he carried a big, heavy sack. He walked straight to Laolu's house, his steps silent and swift. He told Laolu and Fatima that he had heard of their daughter's misfortune and had come to help. "Do not open this sack until I leave," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Laolu and Fatima were puzzled but hopeful. They watched the man walk away, and then they opened the sack. Inside, it was filled with money, shiny and gold. For a moment, they forgot their worries and danced around, laughing and holding each other. They thought this was the end of their troubles, that maybe the herbalist's deal wasn't so bad after all. But as the coins glittered in the sun, Fatima looked at her daughter, still unable to see, and felt a chill. The stranger had left them wealth, but the strong wind had taken something far more precious. Laolu tried to calm her fears, saying it was just a twist of fate. But he alone knew that this was just the beginning. He had made them pay a price for the coins, a price that was too high, and his wife, Fatima, knew nothing about it. With the sack of money, Laolu and Fatima's lives changed completely. They bought big farms and the largest store in the market. Their home was no longer small and shabby. It became a big, beautiful house with many rooms. Laolu and Fatima were now rich, and everyone in the village admired them. Their daughters too enjoyed the new luxurious life. They wore the prettiest clothes and had the most beautiful things. They ate the best food and never went hungry. People in the village started calling them princesses because of their new wealth and fancy lifestyle. But even with all the money and new things, there was still sadness in their home. Laolu's eldest daughter was still blind. Fatima often begged Laolu to use some of the money to take her to a healer. But Laolu always said no. "That's her destiny," Laolu would say with a heavy heart. "We can't change it. We can't." Fatima felt sad for her daughter, but she didn't know what to do. She trusted Laolu and believed that he knew best. The villagers sometimes whispered about the blind girl and wondered why Laolu didn't try to help her, but no one dared to ask him directly. So, while the family enjoyed their new wealth, there was always a shadow of sadness in their hearts. Laolu and Fatima tried to focus on the good things, but deep down, they knew that their happiness had come at a great cost. 2 years passed, and Laolu and Fatima continued to live a life of luxury. Their farms were prosperous, and their store was the biggest in the market. Their daughters enjoyed the finest things, but the shadow of the first sacrifice still lingered. Then, one day, the herbalist sent for Laolu. Laolu knew what this meant. He went to see the herbalist, who told him it was time to renew his wealth. This time, The sacrifice had to be his second daughter. Laolu felt his heart sink. He didn't want to harm another child, but the herbalist warned him again. If he didn't make the sacrifice, he would lose all his wealth and go mad. Laolu felt trapped. After much fear and reluctance, he agreed. He returned home with a heavy heart and mixed another black powder into his children's food. The next morning, his second daughter couldn't speak or hear. She became deaf and dumb. The family was heartbroken, and Fatima cried for her child. But Laolu told her it was destiny, just as he had before. A few days later, the same mysterious man in black appeared at their door. This time, he said he was traveling and asked to stay the night. By morning, he was gone, but he left behind another big sack of money. Laolu and Fatima opened it and found it filled with money again. They were rich once more. Fatima begged Laolu to use some of the money to help their second daughter, but Laolu refused. He insisted it was her fate and there was nothing they could do. Fatima started to feel suspicious, but she stayed silent, not knowing what to believe. The family continued to live in luxury, but now, with two daughters who were suffering. Laolu and Fatima tried to enjoy their wealth, but the price they had paid weighed heavily on their hearts. The pattern repeated itself: a visit to the herbalist, a new affliction for another daughter, and a visit from the man in black with his cursed gifts. With each cycle, the family's wealth grew, and so did the silence in their home. Laughter became rare, and smiles were strained, as if they were trying to remember how they used to curve. Fatima watched her daughters change. Once full of mischief and mirth, they now moved through their days with a quietness that was too heavy for their young shoulders. She saw Laolu's once bright eyes grow darker with each secret he kept buried, each deal he struck in the shadows. Fatima began to feel that something was very wrong. She couldn't understand why their daughters were suffering so much while they had so much money. Laolu's refusal to help their children made her even more suspicious. She decided to find out the truth. One day, Fatima quietly followed Laolu as he left their home. She hid behind trees and bushes, making sure Laolu couldn't see her. Laolu walked to the herbalist's hut, and Fatima watched from a distance. Inside the hut, Laolu and the herbalist spoke in low voices. Fatima crept closer and listened carefully. Her heart pounded as she heard them talk about the sacrifices Laolu had made. She learned that it was Laolu who had caused their daughter's suffering by using them in the rituals to gain wealth. Fatima was horrified. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she loved, the father of her children, had done such terrible things. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and fear. She wanted to run away and tell everyone, but she was too scared. The herbalist had warned Laolu that they would both go mad if the truth came out. When Laolu left the hut, Fatima quickly hid. She watched him walk back to their home with heavy steps. Fatima stayed behind for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She knew she couldn't tell anyone without risking her life and her children's safety. Fatima returned home with a heavy heart. She looked at her daughters, feeling a deep sadness for what they had endured. She knew she had to find a way to protect her remaining daughter, but she felt powerless. She decided to keep the terrible secret, hoping that one day she could find a way to make things right. Time passed, and Fatima continued to carry the heavy burden of her secret. The family's wealth remained, but the cost weighed heavily on her heart. Then, one day, Laolu was summoned by the herbalist once more. Fatima's heart sank as she knew what this meant. At the herbalist's hut, Laolu was told that it was time for another ritual to renew their wealth. This time, The sacrifice had to be their last and only healthy daughter. Laolu felt a deep sense of dread. He couldn't bring himself to harm his last daughter. Under the heavy cloak of another restless night, Laolu returned home with a grim face and a limping gait. Fatima's heart pounded as she noticed his discomfort, then decided to confront him. "I knew where you went. I knew you went to see the herbalist. What happened, Laolu?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear and concern. Laolu sat down, his face shadowed with pain and guilt. "The herbalist," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "He says we need to do more to keep our wealth. It's another ritual, a terrible one." Fatima held her breath, fearing the worst. She cried and begged him not to do it. Desperate and determined to save her daughter, Fatima went to see the herbalist herself. She fell to her knees and pleaded, "Please, there must be another way. I can't let you take my last child." The herbalist looked at her thoughtfully. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "There is an alternative," he said slowly, "but it involves great suffering for both of you." Fatima listened intently as the herbalist explained. "We will make a wound on Laolu's leg, and you, Fatima, must lick this wound every day. As long as you do this, your wealth will remain. But if you ever tell anyone about this, you will die." Fatima felt a deep chill run through her. The thought of licking a wound was repulsive, but the idea of losing her last daughter was unbearable. She looked at Laolu, who nodded reluctantly. They both knew they had no other choice. The next day, the herbalist made a wound on Laolu's leg. It was deep and painful, and Laolu winced in agony. Fatima stilled herself and began to lick the wound, tears streaming down her face. She did this every day, and as promised, their wealth continued to grow. The man in black returned more frequently, bringing sacks of money. The family was richer than ever, but Fatima and Laolu knew that their wealth was built on a terrible secret. Fatima endured the daily ritual, her heart heavy with sorrow and revulsion. She did it for her children, hoping to protect them from further harm. Though they lived in luxury, the shadow of their deeds hung over them. Fatima and Laolu were bound together by their secret, each day a painful reminder of the price they had paid for their wealth. As time went on, Fatima and Laolu's house looked more and more like a treasure chest. Every corner sparkled with new, fancy things. But even with all the shiny riches, a shadow of sadness filled the air. It felt like even though they had everything, they really had nothing at all. Every morning, Fatima had to do something very hard. She had to lick a never-healing wound on Laolu's leg. It was a scary task, and each time she did it, she felt sicker and sadder. Her bright eyes weren't sparkling anymore, and her skin didn't feel warm. Even after many baths, a yucky smell stuck to her, a smell that came from the darkness of the wound. The people in the village started whispering about Fatima. When she walked by, they would say, "Something's wrong with Fatima." The kids, who used to run up to her with big smiles, now stayed far away, making faces because of the bad smell. Fatima was really lonely. Her friends stopped coming by to chat. Laolu felt very sad too. He saw how sick Fatima was getting, and it hurt him because he knew it was all because of the choices he had made. Their house became a sad place. The air felt heavy, and it was hard to breathe. Fatima's task made her feel worse every day, and she missed the happy times. Their daughters were scared and confused. At night, they would whisper to each other, "What's happening to Mama?" They didn't understand why their mother was changing, why she looked so tired and sad. As Fatima got sicker, the village started to keep away from them more and more. They had a lot of money now, but it felt like they were trapped in a golden cage cut off from everyone else. The bad smell and the secrets were too much for the people around them. Fatima knew things were really bad. She and Laolu felt stuck, unable to fix what was going wrong. Every day, when she went to help Laolu with his wound, she wasn't just sad about the pain. She was sad for all the happy days that seemed gone forever. As time went on, Fatima just kept getting sicker, and everyone in the village started to notice. There was a bad smell that followed her everywhere, and people couldn't stop talking about it. It was clear something very wrong was happening in their once happy home. One sunny morning, the village elders, who looked very worried, gathered under the big tree in the middle of the village. They had been watching Fatima get worse and felt they had to do something about it because the family's sudden riches seemed to make things even stranger. The oldest and wisest elder, a sharp-eyed old man, stood up and said firmly, "We can't just watch one of our own suffer like this. We need to find out what's really going on." Everyone around nodded, feeling scared, but knowing it was the right thing to do. With brave steps, the elders went to Laolu and Fatima's house. They went to Laolu and demanded that he take Fatima to a healer. Laolu, looking tired and sad, tried to tell the elders it was just a sickness that would pass. But the chief elder wasn't fooled. "We need to see what's causing this, Laolu. Tell us the truth. Now is the time," he demanded. But Laolu refused at first, fearing their secret would be revealed. But the villagers insisted. They sent strong men to Laolu's house to take Fatima to the healer by force if needed. The men arrived and found Fatima very weak and sick. They gently took her to the middle of the village where the healer waited. Laolu tried to stop them, but they tied him up to keep him from interfering. At the healer's place, the villagers gathered around, eager to learn the truth about Fatima's illness. The healer began her rituals, chanting and waving her hands over Fatima and Laolu. She looked at them with piercing eyes and said, "Tell us what you have done. The truth must come out." Laolu and Fatima were scared. They tried to stay silent, but the healer insisted. "The truth will set you free," he said. Laolu and Fatima were terrified, but they knew they could not hide anymore. Laolu took a deep breath and confessed, "I used our daughters for rituals," he said, his voice trembling. "The herbalist told me to do it, and I agreed. I put black powder in their food, and that's why they suffered." Fatima sobbed and added, "I licked the wound on Laolu's leg every day to keep our wealth. I did it to save our last daughter, but I grew sick because of it." The villagers gasped in horror. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. As Laolu and Fatima finished their confession, something miraculous happened. Their eldest daughter, who was blind, suddenly regained her sight. The second daughter, who was deaf and dumb, could hear and speak again. The third daughter, who had been ill, became healthy and strong. The villagers were amazed and relieved, but their anger towards Laolu and Fatima grew. The village elder stood up and declared, "Laolu, for your terrible deeds, you will be punished. You have brought great suffering upon your family and our village." Suddenly, Laolu screamed and ran mad. He tore at his clothes and ran into the bush, shouting and laughing wildly. The villagers watched as he disappeared into the forest, never to be seen again. The elders then turned to Fatima. "You should have spoken up earlier," they said. "You have also caused pain and suffering by keeping this secret. You are banished from our village." Fatima cried and begged for forgiveness, but the elders were firm. She left the village, her heart heavy with sorrow. She hoped her daughters would forgive her someday. The villagers, filled with compassion, took in Fatima's daughters. They cared for them, raised them as their own, and made sure they were happy and healthy. The daughters grew up surrounded by love and support from the entire village. And so, the tale of Fatima and Laulu ended with a powerful lesson for everyone. The pursuit of wealth at the cost of family and integrity leads to great suffering. True happiness comes from love, honesty, and caring for one another. The village continued to thrive, and the story of Fatima and Laulu was told for generations as a warning and a reminder of what truly matters in life. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.